Till.
Well, while we're waiting, in honor of Joe Flick, what's the weather like in all your individual areas? Do you have clear skies? Summertime temps?
Beautiful out in the North Valley.
Gorgeous
Nice.
weekend.
Yeah.
Blue skies, the birds are singing. Lovely.
Good.
Beautiful in Bozeman, I have to say, blue sky and fabulous.
Cool. My sister-in-law gave me the report up on Swift Current Lookout. Clear there, but she says very smoky in West Glacier.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They had that fire around Quorum. I haven't heard the status of it for a while.
Yeah. I don't know either. Warm and sunny in West Yellowstone. Cool.
Right, we are at the top of the hour. This is a website chat, August 11th, 2023. Take it away, Jenny.
Great. And I want to thank Bobby, who is ably filling in for Coley while Coley's taking the day off. So thank you for joining us for our August website chat. It's great to have you here. And for those of you who are watching the recording after the live session, I appreciate you tuning in to learn about what's going on here at the State Library this month. Some reminder of our tips and tricks for how do we use Zoom. I think we're all pros now, but it's nice to have a little refresher. Bobby, go ahead and go to the next slide. So we've got a bit of a busy agenda for us today. We want to talk about some of the things that were discussed at this last Wednesday's August Commission meeting. We want to make sure that you're well informed about our process to look at some of the administrative rules changes, which are again looking at some of the public library standards. Update you a little bit on some of the discussion from the Network Advisory Council meeting that occurred this past Tuesday. Rebecca is joining us with some updates from the data coordinator, and then sharing some information with you about some broadband funding that's come available to the state through the federal government. So why don't we go ahead and advance. The commission had a busy meeting this past Wednesday. I wanted to make sure we announced, in case you weren't aware, that Brian Rossman has been appointed to the commission as the appointee from the Commissioner of Higher Education. Brian works for Montana State University. He was not able to be at this meeting. He had a previously planned vacation, but will be joining the commission starting at their meetings later this fall. Just a few things coming out of the commission meeting. As you know, the commission considered but did not accept recommendations from the Federation Study Task Force. And so we revisited what those recommendations look like and what the next steps would be for that task force going forward. So some information from that study. The commission does recognize the importance of Federation funds for libraries. They also expressed appreciation for the value of the training and the networking that trustees and librarians get at federations. There's been some concern that they find the structure of the Federation cumbersome and a little bit bureaucratic. The commission directed staff to continue with the study, and one of the requests we had for the members of the commission at this recent meeting was that Federation members attend fall Federation meetings and attend them in person if possible. So some of the commissioners started volunteering to attend those meetings, and we're working with commissioners to make sure that commissioners have a chance to sign up and attend those meetings so that they can really learn more about the value of the federations. And with that information in mind, then we hope the commission will work with the staff to create a new informed charge for the Federation Study Task Force, and we'll again look at how we can continue to improve the overall structure of the Federation starting this winter and into the spring. Tracy, is there anything you want to add about the Federation study?
No, I think you summed it up. I think the Federation Task Force members were right to ask the Commission to kind of attend a Federation meeting, and we'll also be seeking feedback from libraries. And I think the Commission did very much. I know Robin very much spoke about the value of federations. It's just a desire, I believe, to kind of maybe streamline the structure even more if possible.
Any questions about where we stand with regard to the Federation study? Okay, Bobby, next slide. Ooh, gotta break in early. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, I wanted to make sure that we're really clearly communicating some of the work that's going on around changes from the administrative rules. Some of these changes came out of the legislative session, a need to amend the state aid per capita formula to include tribal college libraries now that they are eligible. And so we have a task force of librarians that's looking at all of these changes. That we're looking at the state aid formula. There's a little bit of cleanup in the language of one administrative rule that currently refers to tribal libraries, and we want to make a change to make sure it mirrors the language in statute, which is tribal college libraries. And then there's a handful of public library standards that we're asking this task force to help us review. One is the degree requirement that requires the director of libraries that serve more than 25,000 people to have a Master's of Library Science degree. The other is the standard that currently requires libraries to show year-over-year growth in their budgets. We've had feedback that that may not be realistic, and there's certainly factors that are outside the control of a library and library board. The kind of the intent behind that standard was that libraries and library boards really continually assess the needs of their libraries and work with their governing bodies to make sure that they are asking for and seeking resources to address those needs in a meaningful way that can be demonstrated to their communities. But we understand that it might not be realistic to show year-over-year growth in the budget. We want to define what it means for a library to face a hardship that might require them to request a deferral from me for meeting one of the library standards. The current standards allow for libraries to request waivers and to have a process for creating a plan of improvement to meet those standards. But what it doesn't really clearly define is the circumstances that might lead up to a library requiring a waiver. And I'd like us to be a little bit more concrete in what that looks like. So we're hoping to define what a hardship looks like, and then have a little bit more definition around the deferral process itself and the expectations for the state library to help libraries through the deferral process, and the steps that libraries would take in order to come into a compliance with the standard that they might not currently meet. So those are the things that we have a task force sat to help us address and consider. That task force has been sat, and they have an initial charge with questions to review these specific standards and administrative rules. Their first meeting is coming up on August 22nd. They have another meeting scheduled for about the third week in September. And during these meetings and in between, we're going to be asking for public comment and feedback. We'll have drop-in sessions as we did during our most recent round of updates to the public library standards. So I really encourage you to really be aware of the questions and considerations that this task force is working through and to share your feedback. As it pertains specifically to the question of requiring a Master's of Library Science degree, we're also going to be issuing a survey that asks you many of the questions that we're asking of the task force so that we can get the widest possible input for the task force to consider when they're looking at that specific question. We are also working with an attorney out of the Agency Legal Services Division to help us draft those administrative rules and making sure that we're following a very fair, open, transparent process for that review. In October, the commission is going to consider draft rules from the task force. And those of you who have gone through some of these reviews before know that the next step then is for the commission to adopt draft rules, which then go out for a public comment period that's required through the administrative rules process. So another opportunity for the commission to take further feedback. And then our intent is for the commission to adopt the final rules at their December meeting. I also want to note that at this past meeting, the commission did decide to move up their December meeting from December 13th to December 6th. So note that date on your calendar and we'll make sure that that's updated on our website and elsewhere. Part of the reason why the commission decided to move up their meeting by a week is that the deadline for us to post the final administrative rules with the Secretary of State's office in December is December 12th. So that will give us an opportunity to make sure that we can get those rules posted with the Secretary of State before the end of the year. And then ultimately these changes would largely take effect July 1 of 2024 when we start looking at libraries reporting on the revised standards next year. Any questions or additional input from staff about the rules process? All right. Bobby?
I added these, Jenny, right before our meeting. Do you want me to
Appreciate it. Yeah, why
take
don't you?
this one? Yeah. So the Network Advisory Council met on August 8th, and you can see a list of the current members of the Network Advisory Council on our website if you're curious about which librarians are serving right now. This all-day meeting was specifically about creating a fiscal year 2024 library development plan. So that's setting the priorities of staff such as myself. Rebecca would be included in that, as well as the Montana Shared Catalog, Montana Library to Go, the Montana History Portal, and so forth. And what I tried to do was just kind of highlight the key priorities that they came up with. They had quite a list for us to work through, and staff will be going through it to kind of calendar it out and see what's doable as we go back to the NAC in November with a proposed draft of the plan for them to review and possibly adopt. But some of the key priorities they really wanted us to focus on, and Jenny's going to talk about the federal funding at the end, but basically there is going to be quite a bit of federal funding available that libraries could potentially use to improve the internet access and speed at the library and for your patrons. And so they wanted us to do what we could to help position libraries to take advantage of that funding. They talk quite a bit about some of the challenges that libraries are facing and want us to continue to build relationships with local governments and help libraries, know who to talk to, who to develop relationships with at the local government level, as well as continuing sort of the state partnerships we have with the Montana Association of Counties, the League, and the local government center as well. And then they talked kind of quite a bit about foundational library skills. I think collection development in particular is kind of really in the news quite a bit lately with everything that's going on in Montana's libraries. And so they asked about just sort of thinking about ways to help, particularly small and rural librarians, gain access to training that can help them with these foundational library skills, such as collection development. And then finally, we spent some time talking about the Montana Library Network, which is kind of a concept that we've talked about in years past. It's this idea that we all belong to a larger network, and that we basically, if I were to sum it up in a nutshell, by working together, we can provide better services for Montanans. And we had a structure in place in that model that was the Network Advisory Council and what we call core services committees who looked at things like cultural resources and technology and so forth. So we spent some time talking about how to alter that to really gather feedback from you, to make it more accessible and to perhaps be able to evaluate our services better. And so staff will be talking about how to make those changes to the model. Those were sort of the priorities I could remember, Jenny, Rebecca, and Bobby. Do any of you have something else you would like to mention from that meeting on Tuesday?
You summarized it well, Tracy. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Rebecca, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Good afternoon. So I'm Rebecca. I'm your State Library Data Coordinator. And as you know from your Spring Federation meetings, I had reported that the Montana State Library's contract with our public library survey vendor was coming to a close. And I'm happy to report that we've entered into a new contract with the company Counting Opinions for their product LibPass. And after review with our Public Library Statistics Task Force, we wanted to prioritize a software that would allow us to deploy multiple surveys from a single system because it simplifies training for library staff. And we also wanted more features like templates that would allow you to report to your library boards and other vested partners. LibPass offers all of that functionality, and so I'm excited to use it for this year's Public Library Survey. The PLS is going to launch on October 2nd, but we have multiple training options before the survey opens. The first of which is going to be a webinar, an MSL Learn webinar on August 31st. But if you prefer to learn in person, I'll also present a training at the fall workshops on September 19th in Great Falls. And through this session, librarians and trustees will have an opportunity to learn how to navigate that new software, LibPass, but also how to address some common questions about the PLS, such as financials and programs. We'll preview the new data elements and discuss ways to use the PLS data for informing important decisions and also communicating your public value. So we'll take some time discovering the bells and whistles of the new report templates through the LibPass software. And this training, I wanted to just give a shout out to Tracy and Kara because this training session will be a nice follow-up to their sessions, which are called How Do Libraries Create Value for Their Communities and Measuring the Value of Library Services. So you'll be able to consider how to tell your story for your library. And then if you come to the session on the Public Library Survey, you'll get that quantitative piece. So in addition to those two opportunities, I plan to offer 5 different drop-in office hours throughout October and November. The dates are now posted on the Aspen events calendar. However, if none of the dates work for you, I'm always available to answer questions via a one-on-one call or a Zoom appointment. So please send me an email at rcamp@mt.gov so we can schedule a time to chat. And I'm just going to take a moment to talk about some of the survey changes that you'll be seeing this year. So first, with much celebration from me and probably from all of you, we've eliminated the COVID-19 related questions. Yay!
Yeah.
Yeah.
The pandemic is really coming to an end.
I know. But we've also added 3 different categories of questions, and those are to fill some research needs we have here at the State Library and also at the request of our Network Advisory Council. And those new questions will collect information on your library buildings, salaries, and broadband. And you can preview the questions on the state library site by going to services to libraries, followed by statistics in the mega menu at the top of the screen. I have a survey worksheet for those of you that like to plan and fill out your answers on paper before entering them into the software. And there's also a much more detailed data elements definition guide that provides the complete descriptions for each of the questions. I want to talk just a bit more about the salary questions. I really encourage you to complete this section. It's new this year, but we plan to use this information to create a report that library directors can use to access and find comparable wages around the state, which you can use to make competitive job offers and advocate for appropriate salary adjustment for your existing staff. This information is also going to help MSL and the Network Advisory Council better understand opportunities for supporting libraries in Montana. Similarly, the infrastructure and broadband question will give us some important information. There will be uses as we prepare for potential funds through the federal and state government. And I believe next up, Tracy is going to talk to you more about some of those broadband opportunities that are coming down the pipe.
Questions for Rebecca? Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks for making yourself so available as we navigate a few changes this year. All right, so one thing we really want libraries to be paying attention to right now is some available broadband funding that has come to the state to help continue to support more broadband deployment as well as digital equity, digital access. There was some COVID-related funding that was made available during the pandemic, about $260 million, that is currently being deployed as grants and contracts, primarily to broadband vendors to help with the actual deployment of fiber broadband around the state. And then there's been some additional funding coming for continued broadband deployment, but also for services and opportunities to overcome the digital divide. And for those of you who went through the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program funding a decade or more ago, you'll remember that the State Library invested heavily in public access computers, updates to internet access, and digital literacy services and training. And so we are now involved in helping to plan for and think about what the next round of funding could mean. I want to be really clear that no funding at this point has been allocated to the state library or to any libraries, but we're working hard to position ourselves in such a way that we can make an argument for funding. And if funding comes to the state library or individual libraries, you're well prepared to make use of it. One of the things that the State Library Commission approved when they approved our budget in June was funding for the state library to work with a contract consultant to help libraries create digital equity plans. The federal government is requiring any entity receiving this funding to create digital equity plans to describe what they're currently doing to support digital equity and the opportunities that they see to further those efforts. The state of Montana actually has a digital equity plan as well, and that's something that we have been reviewing and providing comments on, and it does a nice job of summarizing the work of state libraries and the role that libraries play as community anchor institutions in providing broadband access in their communities and serving as a resource to help overcome that digital divide. So there's a lot more information coming as we're still trying to figure out more about what the opportunities look like. Tracy, I think I overstepped you, so please feel free to jump in.
No, you're fine, Jenny. I would say just knowing that we have different sizes of libraries in Montana, one thing Suzanne Reimer is helping me with this, and one thing she and I have really talked about is kind of having a tiered approach, because a digital equity plan for our smallest libraries is going to look a lot different than for our largest public libraries. And so we've been really thinking about how to communicate that to the contractor that we hire so that they know going into this that there's going to be some different approaches that they'll have to take, because many of those of you who are the smallest libraries are probably most desperately in need of this funding and assistance. And so we want to make sure that we right size it for you. I think that's the only other thing I wanted to add, Jenny.
Thanks. One other point I want to make about this broadband funding and digital equity, and I've said this before, and I think it bears repeating. Sometimes this can feel like something new, like it's an additional burden for libraries to have to think about. And yet we know you're already actively engaged in providing broadband services and digital equity services. Even if you might not think about it in those terms, you provide wireless access in your libraries. Every library in Montana has broadband available. You're providing public access computers. You're likely helping your patrons navigate the internet. All of those are services that you're already providing. What we want to think about in this planning process is what you're doing well, what might be barriers for you to either continue to provide the services they are offering, or a hope for a service you might be able to offer in the future, and how can we then plan to address those needs. One of the things we've heard, for example, is that many of you need information technology professionals to help support you and maintaining your networks, maintaining your public access computers, etc. So we wanted to take time to think about and document those so that if the opportunity for funding becomes available, we can address that need. We talked a lot with the NAC about the hotspot program. The hotspot program is a perfect example of a way that libraries are engaged in helping to overcome the digital divide. We hope that that might be a relatively short-term project, one that isn't necessary in the future if broadband becomes both ubiquitous and affordable for all Montanans. But for now, it's a really essential tool that we need to consider. I mentioned the BTOP program earlier, and the fact that the Montana State Library, as you know, provided trainers and people to help educate Montanans about using the internet. And we know that that kind of digital navigator service is likely a need around the state. Like Tracy said, the needs are going to vary depending on the size and resources of your libraries and your communities, but you're all doing this job in some way. And I suspect you all have ideas about what you'd like that to look like. This is a chance for us to work with you to help document what those opportunities are, and hopefully position all of us well to take advantage of the federal funding that's coming our way to really make a difference in our communities. Okay. Bobby, I think that was the end of our agenda. Reminder about our fall workshops, September 18th and 19th in Great Falls. You can obviously see all of us and participate in some of the sessions like Rebecca mentioned. So we hope to see you there. Reminder that our room block closes on the 18th, which is coming up very quickly. So we'll hope to see you in Great Falls. And then finally, just a reminder on the various ways that you can connect with us here at the State Library through our website, newsletters, our MSL help desk. We love doing our open office hours. I hope you're taking advantage of those. The wired listserv, our events calendar, our MSL Learn, and more. So thank you all for joining me. I'm gonna stop and again ask if there's any questions on anything we covered, or maybe anything else that we didn't cover today that you'd like to learn a little bit more about. Okay. Bobby, why don't you go ahead and stop the recording?